Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Boobies and Newbies. You can follow us at Boobies Podcast on both Instagram and Twitter. And if you'd like to support the podcast and get a little extra bonus Boobies content every month, you can support us on Patreon at Boobies Podcast. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Boobies and Newbies Sexy Spotlight Edition. I'm your host, Kelly Reynolds. As it is Women's History Month, we are talking all things female and feminism. In our most recent episode, we reviewed Making Sense by Lila Rose with Keegan and Madigan, the ladies behind Your Angry Neighborhood Feminist podcast. I'm joined once again by Keegan and Madigan.
Hi.
Hello, ladies. You've said hi, like so many times with me.
I feel like if you listen to these in order they were recorded, you will hear differences in our highs. Now we're just like, hey, what's up?
Hi.
We're so warmed up now.
Yeah, so if you've missed it, Keegan and Madigan have appeared on an episode this month where we discuss Making Sense by Lila Rose. Mm-hmm. We also have a little episode of bonus boobies that our Patreon subscribers can check out on our Patreon page.
I'm freaking starving now, just for the record.
I know. We made the mistake, or I don't know if it's a mistake or the smartest thing ever, of recording all of this together at once.
Yeah.
So it's exciting that we've got so much content coming their way. Why record anything else this month?
Exactly.
Here it is.
You're good.
But so, because you're the host of Your Angry Neighborhood Feminist podcast, I thought we had to discuss feminism as it relates to romance novels today, where it's going, hopefully, and also what's evolved over time.
Sure.
So, any initial thoughts just on kind of the genre as a whole?
Well, the thing that, like I said in the episode where we talked about Making Sense, that was the first romance novel I've ever read. So I don't have a whole lot of history in knowing, but the thing that I did like a lot about that book was that it was so sex positive, and that it also was very consensual, the sex between them. There's a lot of communication. Consent was a big thing. It didn't feel, although the character Vice did seem a little bit possessive at times, when it came to their sex lives, it actually seemed very, very healthy. And I think that's something that's really important, especially if there's young readers who maybe have not had a lot of sexual experiences themselves in their lives who are reading it, and see what a healthy sexual relationship looks like through that tone and things like that, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think it's hard to make a blanket statement about romance novels because they can go, like any other genre of literature, I feel like it can go any number of ways, both positively and negatively in relation to feminism. I do like that in general. I think that romance novels are very sex positive, which is something that we need, and I think we're today, yes. And I think we're going to see more of moving forward in the future, which is really, really cool. As far as things that maybe I'm a little more hesitant about with romance novels in general, when we do talk about, and I know that this gets thrown out there so much, but when we do talk about your 50 Shades of Greys, where things start to get kind of very murky consent-wise.
Right.
I think it's very important, just as with any romance movie, for instance, with rom-com, where there's a lot of problematic behavior that's sometimes framed as romance.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That is something just to be kind of a little wary of.
And that's not to say that relationships don't have problems. That's not to say that we're all perfect human beings, because we're not. I feel like just as we can't give a blanket statement to an entire genre, I don't think we can do the same for feminism either. Yeah. So, I mean, it's definitely something that's left up for interpretation.
Yeah.
And we don't want to kink shame anybody.
And I think that's the thing, is that sometimes in relationships, if that's their thing where they do have more of a rough sex life, and it's talked about beforehand, and then there is kind of a master dominant,
established
character
boundaries.
Yeah, I think
there's
that's
an
what's most
understanding.
important. Yeah, is that a relationship, especially a sexual relationship, you need to have so much communication beforehand so that when you are in the middle of it, you have a very good understanding of what's okay and not okay with the other person. You can't just spring it upon someone and expect them to be okay with it when you don't know.
Right. And I'm all for, kinky sex books. Like, I think that...
Agreed.
I'm all for kinky sex. Like, whatever you're into.
But I think that it allows people to explore things in a safe way that maybe they didn't know that they were interested in. And even with 50 Shades, while I find it to be very problematic in a lot of ways, I think that it did allow people who maybe didn't think it was okay or didn't know that was something that they could be like interested in. It allowed them to kind of maybe move out and explore those things in another way, which I think is very cool.
I like the different types of relationships, just in kind of like, again, haven't read more than one romance novel, but in just kind of doing research, looking at like different covers and different genres of romance novels. I like that there's such a variety of like types of relationships.
Oh yeah.
Like there's a lot of like gay relationships, lesbian relationships, and like different types of people and ethnicities, like much like porn in a way.
There's also like, polyamorous relationships and open relationships. Yeah.
Where it's like if you know like what you're into, or maybe if you don't know what you're into and
you
just
can
want to
explore.
try it.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I remember my friend when like a couple of years ago, she read 50 Shades of Grey and got really into reading more romance novels, and she got this book and it turned out to be this like gay romance novel, and she's like, this is hot.
I actually kind of like this.
One of my favorite ones that we've actually discussed on the podcast is this story by L. Kennedy, and it's one guy, it's a threesome. It's like a polyamorous relationship, but it's usually, I feel like when you read poly stories, a lot of it is that there's one woman and there's multiple men and they're all dedicated to her. Yeah. This one I really loved because it was a woman and two men and they were all with each other. Like there were scenes with just the men, there were scenes with men, women, there was scenes with all three of them.
That sounds great.
So I mean there's definitely a variety out there for sure.
And I think that's good for people to see that, like, because I feel like a lot of people who have different gender identities, different sexualities, and different types of relationships don't feel very seen.
Yeah, or represented.
In TV, movies, books in general. So the fact that this genre is kind of willing to go there and make people feel represented and safe and seen, I think is really cool, as long as it's done well.
And I'd venture to say that this genre was out there representing unseen people long before the movies and TV coming out in the last few years were.
It was progressive far before its time, which I would agree with that. You know, even representing women as being sexual creatures who maybe have their own desires outside of men's desires is something that I feel like has been happening in the romance novel.
And we don't have to be dirty whores.
Right.
And especially having it be from like a woman's point of view, because I feel like so often like I talked about reading The Notebook when I was little in the episode that we did, where that's written by a dude. You know what I mean? Like a lot of times it's very much seen through the male perspective. So when we read a sex scene from a woman's perspective, it's almost like you understand it more. Like reading it as a woman, you have like a better understanding of what that is.
There's definitely an element that I think people see in, I'll say for instance, the Game of Thrones series, where there's a problem with the male gaze.
Absolutely.
In that it's not even that I feel like it doesn't necessarily have to be. I'm not saying that every man who writes sex scenes is writing them poorly or making women look awful, you know, because I'm sure that I know that there are male romance novelists as well, or like they write under a pen name.
It's just a lack of experience on their part. Like, I don't think it's wrong. I just think that, you know, who understands what it feels like for a woman to have sex more than a woman.
Right,
you know what I mean?
sure.
It's hard. It would be very hard for me to write a scene about a man without doing extensive research and questioning. I don't know what it feels like to be a man having sex.
Which I often think is something that doesn't happen. You see it a lot in movies specifically, but definitely in books as well, where they don't consult women on they just figure they've got it handled based on their experience, and that is so much a product of what we've done societally in saying that men have this kind of understanding that they just couldn't possibly have. And I haven't read a lot of romance, but it does seem as though romance for the most part is dominated by female writers.
Absolutely. And it's written specifically for female audiences for the most part. So I mean,
great.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a lot of like sister solidarity there, like women writing for women. I think is really
about
great.
women like us, you know. I mean, that's actually been one of the things I've noticed in the last couple of years of reading romance, because I've been reading for about 10 years now, and I've been reading romance for about 10 years now.
I learned my ABCs approximately 10 years ago.
I was a late bloomer. And, but I have noticed in the last few years, I feel like, and I think we're seeing it in especially the reemergence of the romantic comedy that they're putting into like Netflix and stuff now too, is that we're seeing a new kind of romance, and it's a lot more realistic and a lot more grounded, and they don't have to be these
like the
crazy
held above the head and
it doesn't have to be these like grand gestures, and it doesn't have to be these, you know, crazy backgrounds for the characters and their stories. Personally, I appreciate that. I like seeing that I'm reading women who, that could be me. I'm reading meet cutes that are like less cute and more of like an awkward run-in at Starbucks. I'm like, I get it.
Especially when there's a story involving sex, I feel like the more that you can connect to it, the more you're going to be able to get off from it. The more you're going to be able to put yourself in that situation where if you're only reading about one type of woman and one type of relationship, or it's only a super grand gesture, you tend to have kind of an unrealistic idea.
A very skewed image of what romance and relationships actually
And it might be
are.
harder for you to relate to it, especially as someone who's older and maybe has had a sex life. And you're reading that and you're like, I don't connect to this. This doesn't feel real. It doesn't
ring true to me at all.
Yeah. That's interesting you brought up the idea that maybe people would have a skewed image of what romance and relationships are, because I feel like that's one of the criticisms I've read for years of people criticizing people who read romances, saying, well, these books are setting people up for unrealistic expectations. But I feel
like that's the fun of it too.
Yeah, I feel like that's also, I don't think, first of all, I don't think it's fair for people who have not read the books to be judging people and saying what they're taking away and what they're learning from these books.
And here's the thing, for a lot of romance, so maybe not the book that we covered so much, but the book before that we did with My Worst Date, definitely, so much of this is very clearly a fantasy.
Yeah.
So much so.
It's very clearly a fantasy, and I think that you are able to suspend your disbelief in a way that allows you to still enjoy and live in that world without kind of attributing that to actual life. Whereas if you look at romance movies more often, or like rom-coms, I think those will mess you up far more because it's set in a reality that doesn't exist.
Exactly.
And you're supposed to expect that this is an extension of your reality, of something that could possibly happen.
Yeah, I feel like romance novels and porn are very similar in that way. Like if you watch porn, you kind of realize that this is like, you're not gonna
fantasy.
Yeah, you're not gonna walk into the office and the woman's shirt's gonna be half unbuttoned and then all, you know what I mean? Like
that's an interesting comparison to make though, because I feel like people treat porn is to men as romance novels are to women.
Yeah.
Which I get the fantasy element, but to me that's like where it stops there, is like that, because
I think they fulfill different needs.
Yeah, well, and in romance novels you also have a story. You have these characters that you can connect with, even if it's, you know, a wizard from another planet. I mean, there's gonna be like human connections that you can make, but with porn it's not there for that. It's not there to give you this tie.
I would guess that, and I think that this is kind of a obvious difference for me whenever I'm watching porn or reading a romance novel. Yeah. I would say that probably the vast majority of people who are creating porn are men. Yeah. I think that that's pretty clear. Yeah, that's what that is. Whereas in general, maybe with some exceptions, I don't feel like romance is as fetishizing of women, probably because it's written by women.
I agree.
Yeah. If anything, I think it would fetishize men.
If anything, if we're going to swing that direction, if we're going to go one way or the other, I would say that that's probably true.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, I feel like that's probably why with porn, so many heterosexual women enjoy watching lesbian women
That's all I
porn.
watch.
I find it so sexy. I also happen to find two men together very sexy.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I do not like straight porn at all. I think it's very possessive. It's very like, I've had some really bad sexual experiences in my life, and I'm like, I don't want to have to relive that watching porn. It's like, I don't know, there's something weird about it.
There's something far more objectifying in general, and I say this as someone who enjoys watching porn. I'll say, like, there is something far more objectifying about porn in general than reading a romance novel.
Right,
so I'd
for
say
sure.
if you've never read a romance novel, but you've watched porn and you think that they're the same.
They're not.
They're not.
And you know what? I'm not knocking either one because I appreciate both.
Yeah,
so, I mean,
exactly.
it's a matter of kind of, I think, what do you want to get out of it?
I was going to say, it's kind of the mood and what kind of turns you on. You know what I mean? If you do want more of a slow burn and an experience, a romance novel is going to be your thing. But if you just want something kind of
gotta
quick,
get in,
like, I gotta get in and get out. I gotta be downtown in 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Just gotta rub it out and go.
30 seconds to get this done.
So funny. Although I have to say, I appreciate that there is porn coming out now too that's created specifically by women.
Yes.
They're like our feminist porn websites and subscriptions, like, which I haven't checked out, but I'm really intrigued by.
Sex positivity is moving in such an interesting and awesome direction. And I think that can only mean good things for not only the porn industry, but also the romance industry, and also, you know, for sex workers in general, it can only mean very, very good things.
We actually just reviewed a book that was about male sex workers, and they were strippers. Some of them were doing a little something on the side too. So I mean, it's great. I also love that. I mean, I know we're talking about women a lot too, but I do like seeing the different type of male characters in romance that I feel like typically they're not who we might think of as like, oh, that's the ideal man.
Your
like
Fabios.
you know, he's so good to me, but then also like a beast in the bedroom. Like I like seeing the guys who, you know, might not be that, you know, ideal gentleman.
I've got a thing for Jason Segel.
Oh my god, me too. But when he was still chubby, right?
Yeah.
Like no big deal.
Forgetting Sarah Marshall, How I Met Your Mother, Jason Segel.
Prime time Segel.
I love Forgetting Sarah Marshall because that dick is just out.
Yes.
And I'm like, you do you.
I love him.
Me and my mom both love, like, when a guy just bears it all.
Yeah.
Because so much, like, women's boobs are out. And
things
like that. And when a guy...
to do that for so long.
Yeah, so when a guy, like... I don't want to say whips his dick out because I don't want to see a guy whip his dick out. But, like, when it makes sense for the story or is funny or is, like, it's kind of like, you go,
I remember watching Game of Thrones and being like, more dick.
Yeah.
Because, like...
Well, if we did it, it would be normalized, too. It wouldn't be... We wouldn't laugh to be like, oh my god, there's a dick.
And it wouldn't feel so objectifying to women. It wouldn't feel so male-gazy.
That's one of my problems with Game of Thrones.
The first few seasons, especially... They've gotten better, but, like, the first few seasons of Game of Thrones, it was just like naked women everywhere, which I'm fine with, but just for the sake of that and just for the male gaze, there was no other reason. It wasn't a plot point.
Exactly.
And it never, even though there was a lot of sex, did it swing the other way.
No. Yeah. It's like one thing if you're going into the whorehouse, like going to hook up, like, you know it's going to be there. You know that's going to be the environment that you're in. But... yeah, when they're just like walking down the street, like, oh, look at that.
Tits, yeah.
Tits. So many tits.
Which I like tits, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say
and that's another thing that I like is, like, I remember when I first watched Orange is the New Black, how they would show all these different body types and different types of boobs and butts. Yeah. Like, I think that's really great, too. And, like, the book we read where it's a plus-size woman, where it's normalizing, like, the looks of different boobs and butts.
And he just loves her body, period.
Yeah, and we're not necessarily having to justify, like, why it's there or why he loves her. I mean... as a writer, like, my ultimate goal would be that you could write any character, and not have to picture a specific actor to play them in the movie. It's just that they could cast a redhead. They could cast a woman who's 100 pounds. They could cast a woman who's 250 pounds. Like, I don't...
But because that's how life works in general.
Right.
I mean, of course... different people, like, if we're talking about feminism and intersectionality, and of course, like, your life experience will come through. Yeah. And it does affect the way that you are. If you have been bullied for being plus size, that will leak through in other parts of your life.
Sure.
If you're a person of color, if you're a person who's in the LGBTQ community, those things will, of course, leak through and affect other parts of your life. But in general, most people are looked at as people and human beings. And any role, living in LA and being an actor, like, it is really frustrating getting casting notices that are like
ethnically ambiguous,
or they will go out of their way to list everything except for African American or
right.
or whatever, because they have a very specific mental image of what they want, even though it does not matter 90% of the time. And I feel like romance could give that to us.
I agree.
You, like, whoever you are, unless you put yourselves in their shoes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've kind of talked about where we think it's going. It's heading in a positive direction.
I think so. And I think that, like, what I like, too, is that when there are things that are heading in a negative direction, that they're being very much spotlighted. You know, when you see things in movies and TV where you're like, oh, no, that's old-fashioned. Like, we can't. Right. Like, that wouldn't fly today. You know, things like that.
I am curious to hear what you both think about romance novel covers in general. Like, because I feel like as far as we've come in terms of discussing sexuality and having an open dialogue about things like that and the different types of partnerships, I feel like we also are still kind of stuck in several ways. But one of the things I think about are the covers, and that a lot of people are turned off by the idea of reading a romance novel because they have this very specific image of what a romance novel is. And it's Fabio on the cover, you know, bearing his chest, like the woman is all there, dressed like hanging off one shoulder. And we definitely still have some shirtless content on book covers. But is it... What do you guys think about the idea that that's the image people are seeing when that's also, like, not necessarily the cover that we've had for, you know, multiple decades?
I mean, I just think that's kind of their loss if that's the way that they're going to, like, pigeonhole the whole thing. And there's nothing wrong with picking up a book with Fabio on the cover. If that's the thing, there's no shame in that. But I think that, like, then that's clearly that person not really having enough information to really be giving an opinion. It's
been a lot of people, though, that we've had on the show where they've said, you know, I didn't feel comfortable reading this book in public because there's a shirtless cowboy on it, or there's a guy, like, pulling down the zipper on his jeans, you know?
That is true.
So it's something I have mixed feelings about. Like, part of me is like, read whatever the fuck you want. Who cares what, you know, people are thinking?
But, like, you also have to think if, like, as a woman, if I were reading, because I read this on my iPad, so there's, like, kind of a safety there.
Sure.
But if I had a paperback with a shirtless guy or a guy unzipping their pants and I'm sitting at a bus stop reading it, being a woman, I would feel, like, almost afraid.
It's going to attract a certain kind of attention. Because when I did try to read 50 Shades of Grey, I was taking public transportation at the time. And so I was, like, on the bus. And someone had lent me their actual paperback. I wasn't reading it on my phone. And it was a thing that I felt very self-conscious about.
And what's interesting, too, is the cover of 50 Shades isn't even, like, explicit or erotic in any way. It's just that title.
Like, everyone knows exactly what it was. Because it was such a huge deal at the time. And I do think that that's an interesting point. Would you say that more women than men say that they feel uncomfortable reading a paperback? And
that's the thing, is I feel like it's less about the book itself and more about being a woman and feeling that you're being objectified.
Because I think that no matter how much progress we are making as far as, like, sex positivity, society at large, I feel like still looks at women who enjoy sex and want sex dirty. Enjoy reading about it as, like, dirty, or
like they'll sleep with anybody,
or they can get it from you easier, so they're going to try, and, like, things like that. So I can see that as far as romance covers, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't know what else you would do. It makes sense for covers like that.
What are your thoughts then on, because I read this article last year that was about how, you know, there's a lot of romance novelists who make it on the New York Times bestsellers list. Like, a lot.
Right.
And I did read this article last year about how somebody felt like they'd almost been tricked into reading a romance novel because there wasn't a shirtless man on the cover.
I roll my eyes.
It was like a cute, a graphic design on the cover. And
why do you feel like you're being tricked? I don't understand.
Right, exactly.
They
would read it and then say, "Oh my gosh, I didn't realize what I signed up for was a romance novel." And I'm like, okay, well, whether you like it or not, it shouldn't matter what the genre
were
is.
you enjoying it or were you not enjoying it?
Yeah,
right.
Because if you weren't enjoying it, then that you just don't like that book.
So my question then is, do you think that's something that, should they change the covers to attract potential readers, but at the same time, that's kind of lying about...
I mean, I don't think it's lying.
on the author.
Yeah,
it's interesting to me.
It depends on the author and, like, who their audience is going to be, because maybe you are that steamy, Fabio-esque, like, author, and that's the audience that you want. But, like, Making Sense, like, that wasn't obviously a romance novel cover to me, at least.
No, I mean, it had a couple on the cover, but they weren't making out.
Yeah,
I mean,
it could have just been, it's like a little rom-com book or something.
Yeah, I think it depends. I think there's nothing wrong with having a romance novel that has a graphic on the cover rather than a traditional romance novel cover.
I agree.
If you feel tricked, that's because you didn't do your homework. I don't just pick up books and start reading them.
Because of the cover.
I usually read what the book is about and decide whether or not it's something that I'm interested in.
Yeah.
And then it comes down to, if I get to that part of the book where the romance is really getting hot and heavy and I'm like, oh, this is actually not something that I'm into, then you can stop reading.
Skip it.
Or keep reading if it's a book that you are enjoying.
Yeah.
I think if as an author who's also a business person, that's their business.
Mm-hmm.
If they feel like their content is good, they want to get it out to a wider audience, and it makes sense for them to change the cover because they think it would make it easier for people like me to read on a bus, then I think they should do that if that's what they feel.
It's one of the things that, one of the whole reasons I started the podcast was to try and eliminate the stigma, reduce the stigma that's, surrounds the genre. But it's something that's always been on my mind is the covers themselves, and just how is this something that should change? Would that widen readership? But is that like playing down what it is?
But also, why this one specific genre is this problem? Because, for instance, like, I'm looking at this True Blood cover right in front of me right now for the complete second season, and to me, like,
that's pretty sexy.
This is as lurid as anything you're going to get in a romance
This
novel,
is sexier than the book we read. I mean, terms of the
or
cover.
either of the covers of either books that I've covered with you. And we see kind of very sexy posters. There's that whole, if we're talking feminism, I can't remember who it was, so I can't give her credit, but she started the whole campaign about women who have their heads cut off, where it's just their boobs or their legs or whatever, and how often that appears in our media, whether it be in ad campaigns or on movie posters. And a lot of these things, a Victoria's Secret poster, a lot of these things are going to be a lot more sexy than romance covers. So why are romance novels being stigmatized in this way?
Yeah, I think it's because society sees them as a certain way.
It goes beyond judging a book by its cover and goes more to judging the person reading that book, which is it's just so odd considering like the strides we've made. But then,
they consider it. I think a lot of people consider it to be like anti-intellectual or whatever because you're just reading something that's fluff.
It's been compared to real books. Like we've had people, compare it to porn. We've had people compare it to, it actually had a good story. It's stuff that, people say, even on the podcast.
I would argue, too, that speaks volumes as to, like, how people view women. Like, I think it does. Because people also like to delegitimize rom-coms very often. Anything that's made for women to enjoy is very often seen as silly, fluffy, not intellectual at all.
Right.
Which is, I think, I think it's rooted in misogyny. I think it's like a deeply kind of maybe subconsciously sexist thing. And I think for women, we don't want to be seen that way. We want to be taken seriously. It's why women, the whole, like, I'm not like the other girls trope, like, I read War and Peace and I like action movies. I don't read romance and I don't watch rom-coms,
As if we can find as many reasons for people not to judge us, which is, I mean, it's awful to say too, but we judge each other like just as poorly as men judge women too.
I agree.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, well, these, are thoughts that we might have on the genre. And hopefully, though, it does seem that we have high hopes for where the romance genre is going, especially as it relates to feminism. So
I agree.
We'll see. I know I'll keep reading, and hopefully both of you will too.
I totally will.
We'll have to follow back in, 5 years
Circle
and
back
see
around.
where we're at.
I don't know if I start reading another romance novel because you'll be the first person I text.
You'll be
I'll be like,
texted.
oh my god, I just read this book.
Perfect. Can't wait. Thank you so much to Keegan and Madigan for joining me. And if you'd like to check out Your Angry Neighborhood Feminist, you can find them wherever podcasts are streaming, as well as follow their amazing Instagram account at Angry Neighborhood Feminist. Thanks for listening.